The instruction book said that was impossible. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is season 4, episode 21. It's the summer, and normally we like to relax a bit with our format. And in past summers, we've done summers of sci-fi and indulged in some lighter fare. This summer, we are following that trend with some 70s disaster movies. We kicked off our summer with our last episode with the Poseidon Adventure, and today we'll be discussing Airport.
So I think I'm going to be starting us off here. I think we've mentioned this in our previous episode. We were talking about the Poseidon Adventure, but one of the things that I was seeing in some of the articles that I was reading about 70s disaster movies, and I think we talked about this pre or post recording last time, is that the movie that kind of got the disaster genre going, or at least the 1970s disaster genre going, was Airport, which was released in March of 1970. And in one of the ranges of box office I saw, it made, let's see, well, like total, if you're talking about inflation in 2019 or 2020 terms, it would have made $662 million. I'm adjusting there. So it was pretty popular when it came out. And there were, I think, 3 more Airport movies that came out after that. It would be Airport and then the years, like Airport 75, Airport 77, Airport 79. And I believe, I don't know that there are any carryover actors in these other movies. And of course, it was satirized in the movie Airplane, which I believe came out in 1980. So I'm not sure if we didn't have Airport, I'm not sure that we would have something like the Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno, or The Swarm, or Earthquake, or City on Fire, or The Cassandra Crossing, or any of these other movies that we've been talking about, thinking about doing this summer for our disaster movie talks. But I think one of the things that's going to come out when we start talking about Airport is that very much like the president of the Poseidon Adventure fan club said, the people in the Poseidon Adventure were moving throughout the ship, trying to survive. Things were happening. Airport, I was kind of surprised. This was my first time sitting down and watching it all the way through. I paused it at the point when it seemed like the person with the bomb on the plane was about to set it off, and the movie was about an hour and 30 to hour and 40 minutes into its 2 hours and 15 minutes. So we had a long time of kind of building up relationships between all these characters, and there were a lot of famous people in this movie as well, which I think is something that we need to say right off too. So you had Burt Lancaster as the airport manager, Mel Bakersfeld. He and his wife Cindy were having a lot of issues, and he's getting close to probably having an affair with Gene Seberg's character, Tanya Livingston, who I think she had something to do with a trans global airline. She was like either an assistant to the manager or something to that effect. Then you've got, the mechanics crew, the people who are trying to help them out with this blizzard they find themselves in that's causing all the snow to fall that makes one of the planes, that gets one of the planes stuck, which is part of the problem with like where are they going to land when the other plane has the bomb on it. You have Dean Martin and Barry Nelson as the 2 pilots of the doomed plane. I guess I shouldn't say doomed because everybody pretty much makes it through except for the bomber. You have George Kennedy playing one of the mechanics. You have Jacqueline Bisset playing Dean Martin's love interest, who has just discovered she's pregnant with his child, is trying to decide what to do. You have Helen Hayes, who won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for this movie, who plays an elderly woman who's a stowaway, which apparently airport security was full of holes then, or at least in this movie, because she was able to jump on almost any flight she wanted with these various con artist ruses she had, and banking on the fact that nobody was going to follow up on her because she was an elderly woman. And then you have Barbara Hale, who plays Dean Martin's wife, who she's basically in the kind of the beginning of the movie and then at the end. I think I covered all the famous people in it, though there may have been other people that I am leaving out. One other thing I think I need to say as background is it was based on a book similar to the Poseidon Adventure. So it was the book Airport by Arthur Haley, and it was directed and written by George Seaton. So he adapted it for the movie. And I don't think any of the three of us have read Airport, so we can't really speak to the adaptation aspect of it. Before I get to talking any more about the movie or my thoughts on it, I want to get your impressions. So, Lisa, Matt, was this your first time watching it? And second, what were some of your first impressions? Kind of like we did with Poseidon Adventure.
I guess I'll go first. It was my first time watching it. I don't think I've even seen parts of it before. I've seen the spoof of it, Airplane, of very many times, but I've never seen Airport, surprisingly. And yeah, my impression was overall, like after the movie ended, I liked it. It wasn't what I expected. I didn't quite have any preconceived ideas going in about it. I deliberately tried to go in just kind of blank, as though we're watching it cold, for the first time. So I didn't look up anything about it or anything like that. So I did find myself wondering about 45 minutes or so in when the disaster was going to happen, because I knew we were doing this for disaster movies, and I thought, well, maybe it's the snowstorm at the airport. But we can talk more about that later. But overall, I liked it. It was a good movie. Yeah, that's kind of all I got to say there.
I'm so mad y'all made me watch this movie.
Wow. Tell us how you really feel.
No, okay. There were things that I really enjoyed about it. Okay, to be fair, there were a lot of things I liked about this movie. I thought Helen Hayes as the elderly stowaway was wonderful. She just made me happy. I love the way she was just able to manipulate everybody, and the way she absolutely took glee in breaking the law and knowing that people would take pity on her because she was a little old lady. And I can only aspire to be that when I get older. But I loved her. I was very excited to see Maureen Stapleton, who played the bomber's wife, Inez, and because we talked about it on podcast before, she was the Electric Grandmother in The Electric Grandmother, which was a favorite movie of mine from childhood. And I liked it. I liked the way when it did get to the disaster, that like the air traffic controllers, the way that they were going back and forth, that felt very real. And I appreciated that because it kind of reminded me of like later, I guess these would fall under disaster movies, but like, in the 90s when there were all the space movies about people going into space and trying to like blow up a meteor and talking back to people on Earth in the control room. Like that's kind of what it felt like to me, and I liked that. But this movie, and it might be because we're watching it for our summer of disaster movies, and so I was expecting more of a disaster, or maybe it's because we watched The Towering Inferno right before, but it just kind of aggravated me because it was like the complete opposite from what we had just watched. Or not The Towering Inferno. What did we watch? The Poseidon Adventure. I'm getting my movies confused. But it was almost the exact opposite, because with the Poseidon, you had, Mel, as you pointed out, a bunch of people like almost from the get-go running around and trying to survive. And so there was a lot of things to follow, and there was a lot of movement, and there was a lot of, oh no, what's going to happen now? Because, they think they're escaping this way, but they've found out that now there's fire, or now there's flooding, or now they have to go upstairs upside down. There was all sorts of like obstacles to go through, and that felt fun to me. And you got some of the backstory of the people, but really you didn't. Like it spent very little time with each of the characters. You got just enough of a backstory to know, like, okay, here are some kids who are here alone and they're going to see their parents. Okay, here's two elderly people and they're going to see their grandson they've never met. Okay, and then here's these people and it's a weird cop relationship with his wife. You get very little of that. And I realized after watching this movie that that's what I like in a disaster movie. I don't need to know my characters very well because this movie spent over an hour going in depth, and everybody in these relationships, I mean, everybody hated their wives. I was very shocked to find out. And everybody was either thinking about having an affair or having an affair. And it was very soap opera y. And I don't need that in a disaster movie. Plus, when you look at the body count in this, there was only one, which I guess was kind of comforting. It was kind of cozy by the time you got to the end and you could cheer and see that everybody survived. But when you compare that to the Poseidon adventure, and then you only had 5 people they pulled off that ship at the end. So it was a very different movie to watch. And I think maybe if I had watched Airport first, I would have appreciated it more. But I had my expectations were way off.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's because we watched Poseidon Adventure first or not, but I mean I like the movie. I had feelings about the characters even though it was such a large cast of characters. I mean, you're totally right, Lisa, to mention Maureen Stapleton, who played the bomber's wife, and then I didn't even mention the bomber himself, who's played by Van Heflin, because there's just so many characters. It was kind of hard to keep track of them. I actually ended up during the movie kind of checking IMDb every once in a while to make sure that I knew, okay, so Jacqueline Bisset is the flight attendant and, Jean Seberg is playing Mrs. Livingston. And yeah, I mean, I never totally got confused between the relationships, but it definitely was about their relationships. I hate to talk about this and not remember the exact article I read it in, but I read something where the reviewer was mentioning that they liked about the movie that not only that the relationships were set up, but that it focused on every level of how an airport would work. So, like, for example, like they tried really hard to be as close to reality as possible with the way the air traffic controllers were working the plane, which I thought was, my grandfather was an air traffic controller, so I was kind of paying attention to that, and I wanted to look up some stuff and see if they were being relatively realistic. I thought that was pretty cool. But you're following people that you wouldn't normally think of, I guess is a way to put it. Like if you're watching a movie about air travel in that time period, you're probably going to focus on the people who are flying on the plane or maybe the pilots. But this, you got to follow Bakersfeld, who's running the airport. And even though it had nothing to do with the rest of the movie, he's still struggling with people who live nearby, who complain because of the noise and the breakage of their belongings. You've got the corporate person, like in Poseidon Adventure, that's kind of breathing down his neck and won't let him, incorporate more land into the airport. So he's working with not enough, space on his runways and not enough this and not enough funding. But he's still trying to do the best he can do. You've got Petroni and all the engineers and the mechanics who are working hard to try to get the plane out. So one of the things I thought was interesting after reading that, where they were talking about the different strata of the airport, is that you really do kind of see everyone who would be involved. And even though for a disaster, there's not a lot of disastering happening, you do have a little bit of the mystery of trying to figure out what the problem is. And you get to see each of these characters deal with a problem from their space or their perspective or where they would be dealing with it. So yes, I do think I had always thought airport disaster movie, like I just assumed that the disaster was going to happen relatively early. I too was kind of like, what's going on? And then we lucked out and only the bad guy died. But at on the other hand, I kind of thought it was kind of interesting to get this ensemble piece where you got to see this from all these different points of view. Though, yes, the relationships got a little soap opery at some point, and kind of start. It kind of could have gotten in the way, I think, of the disaster plot. And we didn't get enough. I think we didn't get enough fleshing out of Inez and Dio, the bomber and his wife. We got some background on them, but not enough. I mean, it's almost like the bombing is an afterthought in the movie.
Yeah, it's almost like the bombing is an afterthought in a disaster movie. And I don't mean to be like snarky, but like when the plane took off, and or even I'll back up a little bit. When you're introduced to Guerrero, who is the guy who plays the bomber, and he's presented as this man who's down on his luck. He doesn't, he's kind of run through his money. He can't get a job. His wife is working very hard at, obviously not making a lot of money. She's working in like a diner, and there's a scene where I guess it's the last scene where she sees him, and she empties the tip jar to give to him. She thinks he's going to go to get a job, to try to get a job. And I thought that was a very affecting scene, and I liked the way they presented them. But then, and I was like you, I could have gotten to know just a little bit more about him. Like, we knew that he worked in demolition in some way, and so he knew about bombs. And he's doing, he has the bomb kind of from the get-go. And the music, this was another thing that annoyed me, and it was just, I think it's a little bit of indicative of a 70s movie, but you knew immediately he was the bad guy because the music changed as soon as he walked on screen. So that kind of bothered me. But the movie got interesting from that point on, because at that point you realize, okay, all these characters who we're getting to know, something bad potentially is going to happen to them. And then once the plane had taken off, and you saw, I really thought Maureen Stapleton did a really great job playing his wife, because she realizes, you can see her kind of putting things together very quickly, but not at the same time not wanting to admit what she's thinking. And she runs to the airport to try to see if she can stop him, and she's worried about what might happen. And I thought she played that very well. And once the plane was up in the air, it was a good disaster movie, because then they're trying to figure out, okay, does this guy have a bomb? And then once they figure, okay, yes, he most likely does. Okay, how do we get this suitcase that's holding the bomb from him? And then of course he does manage to kind of get into the bathroom, where he does blow up the bomb, and it makes a hole in the airplane. And then the movie changes, because you're up in the air and you're thinking, okay, how do now we land this plane safely now that it has a big hole in the back of it? And all of that, it was very tense. I enjoyed all of that, but it just took so dang long to get there. I mean, I don't know. It bothered me.
I don't want to jump over this point, because I actually wrote this down in some of the notes I was taking. But for a demolitions expert, it really is a little surprising to me that he's smoking a cigarette while building his bomb. Just wanted to throw that out there.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That's an observation. But
he's just that good.
Yeah.
But I'm not trying to derail things. I was just going to say, I totally agree with both of y'all that it takes a little while to get going. And if I had a main criticism of the movie, it's not even necessarily that the disaster happens so late in the film. I think I'm okay with that, mainly because I guess I'm not, like, we're calling it a disaster movie, but I don't know that it completely fits into that criteria anyway. But I guess the criticism would be that it feels so unfocused at first. You're getting such a wide scatter shot of all these different people, and you're not really getting a framework to know how they all interrelate until a good half hour into the movie or more, except for Burt Lancaster's character kind of being a central thread amongst some of them, but not even all of them. So it just kind of seemed at the beginning to jump around from plot line to plot line with it felt kind of erratic, I guess. And so it's kind of hard for me to like figure out what the point was. Like, where is this going? What are you trying to show me here? And eventually it does start to come together. But yeah, that would kind of be my prime criticism of it. Although I'm still not going to be as critical as you seem to be, Lisa. I did like the movie. I'm not gonna go back and watch it like on repeat or anything like that. But I think overall I did enjoy it.
I think I just have such a hard time. And again, let me back up and say there were absolute parts that I loved. I might watch it again just to see Helen Hayes play Ada the Stowaway, because I adored her, and it made me happy to know that she was nominated for awards after this, because it was just absolutely delightful. I thought just everything about it. But and this is, I think, where the crux of it lies for me is, Matt, you said this isn't really a disaster movie. And everything I've read about this movie, and part of the reason we're talking about it, is that its legacy is that it invented the modern disaster movie. So it was kind of the first of its kind. We talked about, when we talked about Jaws a few summers ago being like the first real summer blockbuster, and how it was crafted to be that. And sometimes I wonder with this movie Airport, like with a movie like Jaws, they knew what they were doing, and they had this entire team of people that knew this. We know what this movie is going to be. We know that we need to have a big bad shark. We know that we need to have a big explosion in the end, and we're going to market the heck out of this movie. And then we're going to put Jaws on everything from t-shirts to hats to beach towels, like everything. And they knew what they were doing. It was very crafted. But I wonder with this movie, if it's credited as like inventing the modern disaster film, and it is very different from what we know today as a disaster film. I can see the elements there, but I don't know if this movie necessarily meant to start a new genre of film, if that makes sense. Not in the same way that something like Jaws knew what it was doing. I think this movie was trying to do something different. I think it was trying to showcase the nature of an emergency, like of the real life nature of an emergency like this, and to showcase the inner workings of an airport. But I don't know if it intended to put off an entire genre of disaster films in the same way. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think you're right. It definitely did not feel. It did not feel like it was a deliberate attempt to create a genre, so to speak. And I mean, which is interesting, because wasn't Jaws also based on a novel originally, or am I making that up?
It was.
Okay, yeah. So they're both based on novels, which is interesting, but no, I mean, I think you're right there. It does not seem like it behind the scenes was so self-aware and cynically trying to cash grab. Not that to besmirch Jaws, but yeah, I agree. That's the long and short of that.
Yeah, I do too. I don't know that they were setting out to start a genre of disaster films. I imagine it was only because the film was profitable. I mean, I think it cost 10 million to make, and they made at the time over 100 million. That's probably where the sequels came from. And I was looking through some of the reviews. I didn't read, all of them, but just people kept repeating things that seemed interesting to me. Several critics said it seemed old fashioned to them, that it had too large of a cast of characters, that they felt like they were trying to make a glossy, slick movie in the style of older ones. I think one critic actually said something like, oh, they said something about it was like the most interesting 1944 film to come out in 1970 or something to that effect. Um, so I don't know that they were necessarily like, we're going to start a new genre. I think they were like, this is a cool book. We're going to do a little love letter to airports, but like heighten the tension a little bit. And we're going to throw all these famous people in here and see what happens. I mean, I saw in one spot that Burt Lancaster thought that the movie was horrible, but he made a lot of money off of it because he had a great clause in his contract to get, I think it was like 10% of the profit. So I don't even know that the people in the movie thought it was going to be like amazing or the start of a new decade's genre film. That's just the impression I get. I didn't read any interviews with the people who created it and what they intended.
Some of the reviews I read were not as nice. Even something like that. Did y'all read Roger Ebert's review of the film at all?
Yes.
Yeah. So apparently, I mean, I found this. He said, and I'm just reading just a little bit, that the gags are painfully simple-minded. He gives the example of a priest pretending to cross himself, wax a wise guy across the face, which I thought that was kind of bizarre too, but I just chalked that up to being the 70s. And he says that the characters talk in regulation B movie cliches, like no B movie you've seen in 10 years. So that's something. He does apparently very much like Helen Hayes's character, which I'm glad. But yeah, he calls it, he calls it dull. The relationships between the characters, that I guess they're highlighting that they're deadly dull affairs. He says, that the bomber is typecast, and that there are a lot of typecast, because he said this is his sentence about the people on the airplane. The airplane already has a priest, 2 nuns, 3 doctors, a stowaway, a customs officer's niece, a pregnant stewardess, 2 black GIs, a loudmouth kid, a henpecked husband, and Dean Martin aboard, right? So obviously the bomber has to be typecast too. And, he goes on to say, yeah, he sweats, he shakes, he peers around nervously, he clutches his briefcase to his chest, refuses to talk to anybody, and swallows a lot. And then even the customs officer says there's something in his eyes. So that is kind of ridiculous. I think I saw another review that also accused the movie of being basically like a long advertisement for Boeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that one too.
Which I kind of wondered about that too.
Well, as we were talking about before we started the actual recording of this episode, there's a line at the end where they specifically say that they should write a thank you letter to Mr. Boeing, basically for designing such a great and safe plane. So, yeah, I wonder if some of that $10 million budget may have come from a certain airplane manufacturer.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know, because I would kind of, the movie feels a bit like an extended, yes, there's a disaster, but it's also an extended advertisement for taking a plane ride somewhere. Okay, here's my question to you guys, because I think we know the answer to this, but a movie, even if this is meant to be the first of the modern disaster movies, or it kind of birthed this genre that's still going today, I don't think a movie like this would fly today. You see my pun? I don't think a movie like this would fly as a disaster movie. But I'm curious to know, like, what do you think if they were to to take this movie and make it today, what would Airplane look like?
Well, you wouldn't have the stowaway having such an easy time of it.
You couldn't have the stowaway today, I feel like.
No, I don't think you could. And like you'd have to have some sort of way you'd have to have way more backstory for the bomber and a different way for him to get through security than the fact that there were no bag checks and he just looked kind of suspicious, but the customs guy can only go through it if he's coming in, not out. Like there would have to be much more stringent security. And I don't know that we would have the huge cast of characters now either.
Well, and for the bomber too, like he signs up for flight insurance there in the airport terminal. Like flight insurance was its own actual thing, which I mean, I've never taken out flight insurance through like my insurance provider for anything, and that they're certainly not at the airport terminal. So I mean, the motivation, because I mean, part of it was that he wants to kill himself for the insurance money to go to his wife. So, which I don't know that we've said that part yet about his master plan there. But yeah, I don't think that whole subplot would work. I mean, it would have to be insurance, like life insurance or something like that. But like that's another way that they use to kind of draw out the fact that he's so broke that he ends up paying for part of the flight insurance with like nickels and dimes from his wallet because he doesn't even have enough cash for it. And it strikes the woman that he's paying as odd because here he is on a flight to Rome and doesn't have any money. So there would be a lot of differences. Well, and the wife wouldn't be able to try to find him either because you can't go to the gates anymore unless you have a ticket. So
right, yeah, they kept saying they were not allowed to give her husband's name to her, like tell him if he was on the flight, but she could go up to the like right up to the airplane and ask. And I'm like, you can't. It's a privacy issue to say it on the phone, but she can go all the way up. Yeah, which I mean, when I was a kid, you could go all the way to you could go past baggage claim, but you couldn't go all the way to the desk, like right next to where they were letting the people on the plane. But yeah, she could go all over the airport, you know.
that was one of the most, I thought, heartbreaking things about it. And I wish that the movie, and I think this is where it really frustrated me. I wish the movie had done more with it because you had his wife who, I mean, she's heartbroken enough, you know, realizing that she's not even quite sure. She thinks she knows what her husband's up to, but she's not really quite sure. And all she knows is he's pawned like her mother's ring, the one thing like she asked him not to do. And now he's on this plane to Rome. And, you know, I guess worst case scenario, he's got a bomb with him, which she knows he's capable of. Best case scenario, I guess he's leaving her and just decided to go to Europe. So either way, it's pretty heartbreaking for her. And at this end, when all of the people are coming off the plane and, you know, there's press there and there's ambulances and doctors there, and there's a few worried family members who are there. And then she's just standing there all alone. And there was a shot that got her just kind of looking just to see, will he come off the plane? Because you realize she doesn't know what's happened to him. And like nobody had told her. And that was heartbreaking because it was just like she was just kind of forgotten. And there was another one like that, Mel, where we were talking before we started recording this, when you mentioned Dean Martin's wife, who it has kind of a tragic character arc. You see her in the beginning where she kind of, like, I guess makes light of the fact that her husband's cheating on her. She calls herself his disaster insurance, saying like, oh, he'll never get serious with any of these women because he just flashes his wedding ring and I'm his disaster insurance. And that's really all we get. And then she's there at the end, like worried to see, you know, is my husband going to make it off this plane alive? And he brushes past her holding, you know, his pregnant girlfriend's hand just completely oblivious to the fact that his wife is there. And she learns that he's basically going to leave her. And so we have these two women who are just left like alone in the midst of all this almost tragedy, and their lives have been ruined. And then the movie like ends on like this weirdly happy note where you have two of the characters finally getting together and they're going to have scrambled eggs. And I was just like, that was a weird choice to make in a movie. And I don't know if a modern movie would make that choice. Like, I figure it, I don't know. It felt very strange to me.
Yeah, it felt like we got no real development or closure for anybody. And like, so yeah, as I said before we started recording, I just felt terrible for Barbara Hale, who is there at the end, like, oh my God, my husband Dean Martin might be dead. And yeah, then she finds out he's going to leave her. Also, the bomber's wife has that poignant moment when she realizes what happened and they have to stop her because she's running up to everybody on the plane crying, telling them that she's sorry and she wished it never happened. And that just about ripped my heart out. And so you've got these two poignant, like painful moments where you realize this woman is going to have to live the rest of her life with guilt because of what her husband did, which there's so much more backstory there that we don't get. It turns out that he was hospitalized for possible mental health issues, but there's no real explanation. It's just kind of dismissed, like, oh, he's our guy, let's go stop him. And so she's got to live the rest of her life with this. We already know that she can't have her children with her because her sister took them because they were trying to get back on their feet. So who knows what's going to happen there. And then Barbara Hale's character finds out that her husband's leaving her basically because some doctors say that the flight attendant is pregnant. And then he comes through and says, you know, but not knowing she's there. And you're right. At the end, you have the thank you note to Boeing with the happy music playing. And good old Mel Bakersfeld, who just got done telling his wife that he had to do his job because it was so important and people's lives depended on it, blows off some folks who need his help with something to go eat scrambled eggs with Gene Seberg. And you're just like character development blown out of the water. And yeah, it was an odd juxtaposition of tone, kind of like the weird humorous moments that would pop up when things are really dire. The tone was also slightly erratic sometimes, I think, in addition to the plot and the character development. And don't even get me started on the urgent music when nothing was happening.
Yeah, I wrote that down in my notes at one point. As I was like, this is the most 70s soundtrack to a movie I think we've ever listened to. Like, it was very, very much, very, very, very much a 70s movie. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like if it was made today, I don't know if like they might have followed. You might have followed like one character and their kind of backstory character arc, because there's always got to be a character or two that you worry about getting back to something in their real life. Like, that's just the mark of a disaster movie. So I feel like maybe at some point, you know, you may have had a wife back home that they're trying to get back to, or, you know, a pregnant wife or something. But I don't think it would get as complicated as these did, especially with no resolution, because most disaster movies will give you that. I will say one thing for this, because I did like a lot of the casting in this movie. Because I feel like today, if it was going to be an airplane that they were trying to get a bomber off of, it would probably like be a Vin Diesel movie or something. And I don't think I would enjoy that either.
Ooh, Vin Diesel and The Rock in airport. Yeah, I like it.
You know, and there would probably be a lot of just kind of like really bad one-liners, you know, like really punny one-liners, and a bunch of like hitting people. Like, there was remarkably no fighting in this movie for a disaster movie.
Yeah, Jacqueline Bisset did the most fighting. The flight attendant trying to get the bomb away from the guy.
Right. And then she was kind of foiled when I did think this was kind of clever, but they were all, you know, they were talking the bomber down. They were using their words to kind of talk him down. And then he was surprised by a man coming out of the airplane bathroom, and that's kind of what set everything off because he goes into the bathroom and that's when he makes the decision to um pull the tripwire on the bomb. But yeah, like nobody fought. It was there. Somebody was slapped a couple of times. I feel like there maybe were a couple of slaps, but it was more of like a don't be hysterical type of slap. Um oh, and when Jacqueline Bisset's character, the flight attendant, hit the old woman but that was a ruse. I
Mhm.
thought that was kind of clever. I enjoyed watching that. But that's just more of my love for Helen Hayes in this movie. But yeah, nobody fought. There were no like punches thrown. I feel like if this were like a Vin Diesel The Rock airplane airport movie, I'm gonna say airplane this entire airport. Wait, what is it? Airport?
It's
What did
airport.
we watch? Thank you. I feel like if this was like a Vin Diesel The Rock airport movie, that's at least one of them would have jumped out of the plane.
Oh,
You know?
absolutely. One of them would have been sucked out during the decompression and had to like pull their way back in. So I can guarantee you that much.
I don't want to derail this, but Lisa, I have to say, while I was watching the movie, I thought to myself, this violates every single one of uh, Lisa's rules for disaster movies, trademark. Um, except for the fact maybe that Jacqueline Bisset kind of sacrifices herself. She doesn't actually die. She makes it, but she's pretty banged up and she tries to get in the bathroom and stop him. But otherwise, I mean, am I correct? I don't think this followed any of the rules that you set up because the people didn't really do anything.
I think you just hit the nail on the head why I got so mad because don't you think I forgot about my disaster movie rules? Um yeah, here's the thing. Here are the things that a disaster movie has to have per me. You have to have a number of deaths, and I think this is what bothered me is you only had one death, and it was, I guess, the bad guy. And I think they were trying to make us feel sympathy for him, but because he was such a flat character and he was such almost a caricature of what you would have expected, that I didn't feel sympathy for him. But yeah, my death rules, like you've got to have the ones who don't listen. Like you've got to have this, the hero, and then there's got to be the ones who don't listen to him and then die so that he's the hero. There's got to be the one that everybody loves, the one who almost makes it, and then like the sacrificial death. And you're right, like Gwen kind of fits almost all three of those because I think she's the closest thing to like a lovable character other than Ada, the elderly stowaway. And she does kind of sacrifice herself. So she does that heroically. And then I said, and I'm so mad we didn't get this. There wasn't anybody climbing on anything, so they couldn't yell "Don't look down," and they were in an airplane. Like somebody could have yelled "Don't look down."
I mean, they did even have the shot of them trying to fix the hole
The
in the
hole.
yeah.
I know. And at one point, like there was that rip in the plane, and I thought, ooh, the tail's gonna come off and like send them into like and no, it didn't. It just shook a little bit. And I was like, that would have been cool because you could have had somebody be like, we have to patch this, plane. And no, that didn't even happen. So you didn't get that. You didn't get a woman saying, I can't do this. Like I also wrote this down in my notes. Everybody on that plane remained so calm throughout the entire movie, and I just did not believe it.
Even the passengers like were fairly subdued even in the presence of there being a bomb.
Absolutely. I mean, even that, but if you know a bomb, I'm just thinking, okay, it's bad enough to realize that you think there's a bomb on the plane. And then the bomb goes off, and you realize that a bomb has gone off in an airplane, and you're way up in the air. I'm just thinking there's no way that I would not be just absolutely a basket case at that point. And nobody was. They all just stayed very calm and listened to everybody and did what they were told. And I found that very bizarre. And then, there was no like fighting to see who was in charge. Like normally there's like at least two men who are fighting over who's going to be the leader of this like disaster group. And you didn't get that at all. There was no arguing. Everybody just stayed so calm. And there was nobody said the words promise me you'll be back. And that bothered me because I don't know, that's like the don't look down, like, or, it's stock standard disaster movie lines. And
I will say this: Burt Lancaster and Dean Martin were constantly arguing about what the best course of action was. Dean Martin
they
was so
did
angry
not.
because they wouldn't allow him to use the runway that he needed. So it was subdued compared to what you want. There was some disagreement.
That was not disagreement. The most that we got as far as like a brash, like heroic disaster movie guy who's gonna like argue with people was Petroni. And all he did was push a plane out of the snow. So
one of the things that I was thinking was kind of interesting while I was watching the movie was, and I believe you dropped this in our document, Lisa, is the real life plane crash that people have said inspired the book, which then, of course, I think you could probably trace that influence into the movie. There was a crash of a Continental flight in 1962. I believe it originated in Chicago, which is, happens in airport. The plane ended up crashing in Unionville, Missouri, because there was a bomber on board. And so some of the things that we've been talking about were things that had come from real life. So the man who ended up bombing the plane had access to explosives. He had gone through a pretty terrible time of employment. The reason they don't know much about what happened is because the plane was only a third full and everybody died in the crash. So there was no way to know precisely what happened. But based on the evidence that they found, this man was having a lot of personal issues, particularly with his job. One of the things that tipped them off was the explosive residue in some of the luggage that belonged to him. He later in the flight went to the bathroom by himself with his briefcase. That was where he exploded. His bomb was in the bathroom of the plane, which caused the tail to be ripped off, which is why they crashed. And they crashed in a very rural area. I believe there's a memorial there now. And when people went to check, they found that the pilots had been trying to land the plane, but they just couldn't. There was one technical survivor, a Japanese engineer named Takahiko Nakano, was actually alive. He had fallen. I mean, this would be thousands of feet, so the plane fell. He was alive at the time, but he died. He was extremely injured, and he died 90 minutes after he was found at a hospital later that morning. So apparently until they realized there was explosive residue on one of the bodies and the man's luggage and in the bathroom of the plane, they thought that maybe it was severe weather. Another tip-off was they realized that right before he took off on the flight, he bought life insurance from one of the insurance counters that was right near the check-in for his plane. So we see a lot of similarities between the two. In this particular article by Jonathan Bender, he mentions to the people he's talking to in the area 50 years after the crash about how people say it inspired Airport, and they get, I think, rightfully irritated with him to a certain extent because they say Airport is a love story where everybody survived. This is where a story where everybody passed away and was extremely violent. And so the real life situation, the tail comes off, they can't land properly, everybody passes away. In the movie, there was almost like this romantic rewriting of it where it focused more on those relationships. The tail might fall off, but it magically can stay on even though the exact same explosion happens. And you have them writing the thank you note to Mr. Boeing at the end because the plane managed to survive. And so I can understand why some of the people who might have been there or knew people who were involved in the crash would be like, oh, that's just kind of like a romantic retelling of what the horror that actually happened. So I thought we should probably bring up the fact that there is that speculation that this was inspiring it. And I think in some ways, some of the things that we're pointing out in the movie that seem inconsistent to us now, or even within the movie itself, is them maybe what's what I'm looking at? I'm looking for like riffing off of the real life aspects of what happened. So, listeners, we are going to stop our discussion of Airport there, but do not worry. As we promised last time, we are going to be talking about more disaster films to come this summer, with fire and earthquake and insects and whatever else we can discover and watch, and we will see if Lisa's disaster rules pan out in any of the other movies that we investigate. In the meantime, we would love to hear from you. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. If you'd like to contact us by email, please send us an email at nofearcast@gmail.com. Maybe you want to tell us about your thoughts about Airport or the Poseidon Adventure, or you want to tell us your favorite 70s disaster movie as a way to kind of escape what we're facing right now in the world for a little bit. And if you love what we're doing, if you love listening to our episodes, consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to exclusive content. Every month we put out a mini episode that kind of builds on or is related to our main episode. And folks who are $5 a month patrons have access to that content, but we completely understand, particularly with what's going on now in the world, that may not be an option. So you can always, if you're enjoying the show, simply rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcatcher you use to listen to us. That is entirely free, and it definitely helps other listeners find us. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you're enjoying this series, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.